The corridor outside the intensive care unit in Nairobi was unnaturally quiet. Machines hummed, shoes stopped moving, breath was held. Inside, Nia Mwangi lay motionless, her swollen belly rising only slightly beneath the sheets. The monitors told a story no one wanted to hear. One by one, 12 doctors stepped out of the room. Eyes lowered, voices empty. There was nothing more they could do. At the center of the hallway, Joseph Mwangi, the billionaire who owned half the city's private hospitals, sank to his knees. Money had opened every door in his life, except this one. Then through the stunned silence, an old woman in a faded nun's habit walked forward. "I need to see her," she said softly. Security moved to stop her. The heart monitor inside flatlined, and the nun whispered, "If you turn me away now, you will lose them both." Before the story continues, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories of love, justice, and second chances move, you don't forget to subscribe. Long before anyone in Nairobi knew the name Mwangi as a symbol of power and wealth, Nia Mwangi was simply Nia Barefoot. Most mornings waking to the sound of roosters and distant matatus, rattling along a dusty road on the edge of the city. She grew up in a one-room house with a leaking tin roof, where rainwater dripped into bowls at night and dreams had to be protected as carefully as food. Her mother sold vegetables at the roadside market. Her father died when she was 12, leaving behind more debt than memory. From that day on, Nia learned a quiet discipline. Endure first, complain later, if at all. She studied by candlelight, tutored younger children in the neighborhood for small coins, and learned early that dignity was not something money could buy or take away. It was that dignity that shaped her. By her early 20s, Nia worked as a community volunteer in a public health outreach program, moving between informal settlements to teach young mothers about nutrition, prenatal care, and hygiene. The work was exhausting and often thankless, but she loved it. Helping people reminded her that suffering did not have to erase kindness. That was where she met Joseph Mwangi. Back then, Joseph was not yet the billionaire the city would later bow to. He was already successful, sharp suits, confident stride eyes always scanning for opportunity, but his empire was still forming. He had come to the outreach center to fund a pilot health project, more interested in data than people. Nia noticed him standing apart from the crowd, uncomfortable in the heat, distracted by phone calls. She did not recognize his name. To her, he was just another visitor who looked like he belonged somewhere else. When a pregnant woman fainted during the session, it was Nia who rushed forward first. She knelt on the dusty floor, lifted the woman's head, spoke calmly, and called for water. Joseph watched from a distance, something shifting quietly behind his composed expression. Later, he asked her questions not about budgets or numbers, but about why she did this work. "Because someone has to," she answered simply. That answer stayed with him. Their relationship did not begin as a grand romance. It grew in fragments, short conversations, shared lunches at roadside stalls, disagreements about priorities. Joseph admired Nia's clarity. Nia admired his ambition, though she sensed the sharp edges beneath it. When he asked her to marry him, she hesitated, not because she did not love him, but because she understood the world he came from. Wealth brought comfort, yes, but it also brought judgment, hierarchy, and silence. Joseph promised her protection. He promised partnership. He promised that no one would ever make her feel small again. She believed him. The wedding was elegant, discreet, and watched closely by society. Cameras flashed, congratulations flowed. Yet from the very beginning there was one absence that Nia could feel, even when no one named it: acceptance. Joseph's mother, Margaret Mwangi, was polite but distant. Her smiles never reached her eyes. She never raised her voice, never insulted Nia directly. Instead, she used subtler weapons comparisons, suggestions, sighs heavy with disappointment. "She is different," Margaret would say to friends. She means well, but she doesn't understand our world." Joseph noticed, but he did not intervene. Not firmly, not publicly. He told himself time would soften everything. Nia told herself patience was love. When she became pregnant, she hoped quietly that things would change. A child might bridge what wealth and marriage had not. She imagined family dinners without tension, conversations without careful wording. But pregnancy did not bring peace. It brought scrutiny. Margaret began visiting more often, commenting on Nia's diet, her posture, her habits. Doctors were recommended, then replaced again. Every small discomfort was treated as proof that Nia was not prepared for this life. Stress crept in, slowly disguised as concern. Nia stopped sleeping through the night. She woke with a tightness in her chest, her hand instinctively covering her belly. Some days the baby kicked as if reminding her to stay present. Other days there was only silence. She told Joseph she was tired. He told her everything was under control. She told him she felt watched, measured, evaluated. He told her his mother meant well. The words he did not say weighed the most. At her prenatal appointments, nurses noted rising blood pressure. Doctors suggested rest. Nia nodded, smiled, followed instructions. But rest was difficult in a house where every gesture felt observed. She did not want to be seen as weak. She did not want to confirm the unspoken belief that she did not belong. So she endured. The night she collapsed at home, Joseph was in a late meeting. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Nia was already unconscious. The diagnosis was vague: complications, stress-related factors, unexplained internal distress. The pregnancy was suddenly labeled high risk. Joseph reacted the only way he knew how. He called specialists, flew in consultants, expanded the circle of control until it felt airtight. He spoke in commands and contracts, believing certainty could be purchased. Yet beneath the sterile lights of the ICU, Nia drifted further away from the life they had imagined. As the days passed, the doctor's confidence faded. Words became cautious, answers grew shorter. And Joseph, for the first time, felt something unfamiliar press against his chest. Fear. Not fear of loss alone, but fear of realization. That somewhere along the way, love had been replaced with management. That promises, made in private, had been abandoned in public silence. That Nia had carried not only a child, but the weight of being tolerated instead of embraced. Outside her room, he stood alone, replaying moments he had dismissed. Times she had looked at him, searching, waiting. Times he had chosen peace over justice. Inside, Nia lay still, her body fighting battles no one could see. And as the city beyond the hospital continued its restless movement, a truth waited quietly in the corridor: that what threatened Nia's life was not only medical but deeply, devastatingly human. Joseph Mwangi had built his life on certainty. From the moment he left university with a sharp mind and a restless hunger, he had learned to move faster than doubt. Where others hesitated, Joseph calculated. Where others feared risk, he bought it, shaped it, turned it into leverage. By 40, his name was attached to hospitals, diagnostic centers, private clinics across East Africa. He believed in systems: clean, measurable, efficient systems. Emotion to him was something to be managed, not trusted. That belief had served him well. Until now. Standing outside the ICU, Joseph watched the red numbers on the monitor through the glass wall rise and fall with mechanical indifference. Every beep felt like a countdown he did not control. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by people who did not look impressed by his name. Doctors spoke carefully around him. Nurses avoided eye contact. Even money seemed to hesitate. Joseph told himself he was calm. He told himself this was temporary. Complications happened. The best equipment was here. The best minds had been summoned. Everything that could be done was being done. Still, something inside him felt unsteady, like a foundation discovering its own cracks. As a boy, Joseph had grown up in comfort, not cruelty. His mother, Margaret Mwangi, believed in order, discipline, and reputation. She taught him early that vulnerability was dangerous. In their world, weakness invited intrusion. Appearances mattered, because appearances controlled outcomes. Joseph absorbed that lesson deeply, so when Nia entered his life, soft-spoken but unafraid, grounded without being rigid, he was drawn to her difference, even as he underestimated its cost. He loved her honesty. He loved how she spoke to people, without checking their status first. But somewhere along the way, admiration became assumption. He assumed love would be enough to shield her from the world he knew. He was wrong. In the ICU waiting area, Joseph replayed the early days of Nia's pregnancy. The way she had smiled when she told him. The way her hand had trembled just slightly as she placed it over his on the table. He had been proud already, planning the future school's trust security. He had not noticed the fear behind her excitement. Margaret had noticed immediately. She needs guidance, his mother had said. Pregnancy is serious, especially for someone without experience. Joseph had nodded, half listening, scrolling through emails. Margaret's visits became frequent. Her suggestions came wrapped in concern. She spoke about tradition, about expectations, about responsibility. She questioned Nia's background without ever naming it directly. Joseph told himself it was harmless. When Nia mentioned feeling overwhelmed, he reminded her of the doctors, the support, the resources. When she said she felt invisible, he told her she was overthinking. When she fell silent, he mistook it for peace. That silence now echoed painfully in the sterile hallway. Dr. Thabo Ndlovu approached him quietly, holding a tablet close to his chest. "We're monitoring her closely," the doctor said. "But her stress indicators are unusual. They don't align neatly with physical causes." Joseph frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Thabo replied carefully, "that the body remembers what the mouth does not say." Joseph felt irritation rise. "With respect, doctor, I didn't ask for philosophy. I asked for solutions." Dr. Thabo met his gaze without flinching. "Sometimes, Mr. Mwangi, the solution is not mechanical." Joseph turned away sharply. He did not want riddles. He wanted control. He made calls. More specialists were contacted. Legal teams prepared waivers. The hospital administration reassured him of their full cooperation. Everything moved, except Nia. Inside the ICU, her body fought quietly. Her blood pressure spiked and dropped unpredictably. The baby's heart rate fluctuated in ways that made nurses exchange worried glances. No single diagnosis held long enough to become an answer. Joseph sat alone, late into the night, his suit jacket draped over a chair, his tie loosened but forgotten. For the first time in years, there were no meetings scheduled for the morning that mattered more than this. He thought of the night Nia had asked him in a small voice, "Do you think your mother will ever see me as family?" He had smiled and kissed her forehead. "You worry too much." The memory burned now. Joseph stood and walked to the glass wall again, pressing his palm against it as if he could reach through. Nia's face looked peaceful in sleep, but he knew better. Peace was not the same as safety. He felt something crack, not loudly, but enough to hurt. Fear gave way to guilt. Guilt gave way to a deeper realization that he had protected his comfort at the expense of her voice. That, by staying neutral, he had chosen a side. When Margaret arrived the next morning, dressed impeccably, her presence filled the waiting area with quiet authority. "How is she?" she asked. Joseph answered without turning. "Critical." Margaret sighed. "These things happen. Some women are more fragile." Joseph stiffened. "She is not fragile," he said. Margaret paused, surprised by his tone. "Joseph, I only mean I know what you mean." He cut in finally, facing her. His eyes were red, his voice strained. "And I should have stopped it sooner." Margaret looked away, unsettled. That afternoon, the 12th doctor arrived and left within the hour. The meeting that followed was short-heavy with implication. Dr. Thabo spoke the words Joseph had been dreading. "We are approaching the limits of intervention," he said. "We will continue, but you need to prepare yourself. Prepare." The word echoed hollowly. Joseph sat back down, suddenly aware of how small the chair felt beneath him. For the first time, his wealth offered no comfort. His name opened no doors. His certainty dissolved into a single unbearable truth: that love, when delayed, could become damage. And that somewhere in the quiet space between intention and action, Naya had been left to carry more than she should have alone. As the monitors inside continued their relentless rhythm, Joseph bowed his head, not in strategy, not in calculation, but in a fragile, unfamiliar surrender. The conference room on the 6th floor of the hospital had never felt so crowded. 12 men and women, each a specialist in their field, sat around the long glass table, their white coats forming a stark ring of authority. Cardiology, obstetrics, neurology, internal medicine. Names that carried weight across Africa. Degrees from Europe and America. Careers built on saving lives that others could not. And yet in that room, certainty was absent. Dr. Thabo Ndlovu stood at the head of the table, hands resting flat on the surface, eyes moving slowly from face to face. The air was thick with unspoken failure. "We've ruled out the usual causes," he began. "There is no hemorrhage, no infection we can identify, no genetic abnormality explaining the severity of the response." One of the obstetricians leaned forward. "Her uterus is under extreme stress. The baby's oxygen supply fluctuates without pattern. We stabilize it, then it drops again." Another doctor shook her head. "Neurologically, there's nothing conclusive. No stroke, no seizure activity. But her body reacts as if it's under constant threat." Joseph Mwangi sat apart from them, his presence heavy, silent. He listened without interrupting, though every word landed like a blow. "What about surgery?" he asked finally. A brief pause followed. Dr. Thabo inhaled slowly. At this stage, surgery could save the baby, or it could kill them both. The room fell quiet. Joseph's jaw tightened. "You told me this hospital could handle anything." Dr. Thabo met his gaze. "We can handle many things, Mr. Mwangi, but the human body is not a machine. Sometimes it breaks in ways we don't yet understand." Joseph looked around the table. 12 experts, 12 minds, 12 different methods, all converging on the same wall. "So that's it?" he asked. "You give up?" "No," the cardiologist said quickly. "We continue monitoring. We try supportive care. We manage symptoms. We wait." Another added softly. Joseph stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Waiting is not a plan." But even as he spoke, he could feel the truth pressing in. There was no hidden protocol left to unlock, no secret treatment behind a signature or a payment. The meeting ended without resolution. Outside, nurses moved with quiet urgency. Family members whispered in corners. The hospital continued functioning, but around Nia Mwangi's room, time seemed suspended. Joseph returned to the ICU corridor, where the digital clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking seconds that felt stolen. Through the glass, he saw Nia's chest rise and fall unevenly. The machines around her hummed with artificial patience. A nurse adjusted an IV. Another checked the fetal monitor. Their movements were precise, practiced, but their eyes betrayed worry. Joseph felt anger rise again, sharp and directionless. He blamed the doctors. He blamed the hospital. He blamed the unpredictability of biology. And beneath all of it, a quieter voice whispered, blame where he least wanted to hear it. Himself. He remembered the night Nia had woken him breathless, her hands shaking. "I feel like my body is screaming," she had said, "and no one hears it." He had glanced at the clock, already late for a call. "You're tired," he told her. "Try to sleep." That memory returned now with cruel clarity. In the afternoon, the doctors attempted another adjustment medication to regulate blood pressure without stressing the baby. For a brief moment, the numbers stabilized. A fragile hope flickered. Then the alarm sounded. Sharp, urgent. Nurses rushed into the room. Doctors followed. Joseph stood frozen as the baby's heart rate dipped suddenly, dangerously. The monitor's rhythm turned erratic, like a sentence breaking apart mid-word. Dr. Thabo's voice cut through the chaos. "Prepare emergency response. Now." Joseph pressed his fist against the wall, unable to breathe. Minutes stretched into something unrecognizable. When the team emerged again, their faces told the story, before any words were spoken. "We brought her back to baseline," Dr. Thabo said. "But we're losing ground." Joseph's shoulders sagged. "How many more times can her body do this?" he asked. Dr. Thabo hesitated. "I don't know." That evening, Margaret Mwangi returned, her composure strained but intact. She sat beside her son, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "You look exhausted," she said. Joseph didn't answer. "I've called a specialist in Europe," Margaret continued. "He's willing to consult remotely." Joseph closed his eyes. "We've had 12 opinions. This one is different," she insisted. "He's very well respected." Joseph opened his eyes slowly. "So are the others." Margaret frowned. "Joseph, we must do something." "We are doing everything," he snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. He exhaled sharply. "I just don't know what else to do." Margaret softened, reaching for his hand. "Sometimes my son nature decides for us." Joseph pulled his hand away. That night he did not leave the hospital. He sat alone as the lights dimmed, watching shadows move along the floor. He listened to the distant sounds of the city beyond the walls, cars' voices, life continuing without pause. Inside the ICU, Nia drifted between worlds. Her body responded not to logic but to something deeper, older, an alarm that had been ringing for too long. Just after midnight, Dr. Thabo approached Joseph again, his expression grave. "We need to talk," he said. Joseph stood. "If her condition deteriorates further," the doctor continued, "we may be forced to make a decision, who to prioritize." The words hung between them like a blade. Joseph felt his knees weaken. "You're asking me to choose," he whispered. "I'm asking you to prepare," Dr. Thabo replied gently, "because soon there may be no time." Joseph nodded numbly. As the doctor walked away, Joseph leaned back against the wall, his breath shallow. The idea of choosing between his wife and his child tore through him with savage force. He had built hospitals to save lives. He had funded research, sponsored wings, donated equipment. And yet here he was, powerless in the one place that mattered most. At the far end of the corridor, unnoticed by most, an elderly woman stood quietly. She wore a faded habit, her hands clasped, her posture calm amid the tension. She watched the lights above the ICU flicker slightly, then steadied her gaze on the door behind which Nia lay fighting. Her name, though, few yet knew it, was Sister Ruth Adebayo. And while the doctors counted minutes and Joseph counted regrets, she waited not with fear but with purpose. Because she knew something the others did not. That sometimes when every scientific answer has been exhausted, the body is not asking for intervention, but for release. The ICU corridor had become a place of quiet confessions, though none were spoken aloud. Joseph Mwangi sat alone, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. Around him the hospital hummed with routine efficiency. But in his mind everything slowed to a painful crawl. Every second felt like a question with no answer. He began to see patterns he had once refused to acknowledge. The truth was, Nia had not collapsed suddenly. She had been unraveling for months, slowly, silently, under a pressure that wore the polite mask of concern. And Joseph, in his determination to keep peace, had let it happen. Margaret Mwangi never raised her voice. She never insulted Nia directly. Instead, she practiced a more refined cruelty. At family dinners, she would praise other women Joseph knew, wives of executives, daughters of politicians, while Nia sat quietly smiling through the comparisons. She commented on Nia's accent, her manners, the way she dressed. "You are very simple," Margaret once said, adjusting the table settings herself after Nia had already done so. "Joseph's world requires a certain polish." Joseph remembered that moment clearly now. He had laughed it off, squeezing Nia's hand under the table, hoping the gesture would compensate for his silence. He told himself his mother would soften with time. Time instead sharpened the wounds. During Nia's pregnancy, Margaret's presence intensified. She questioned every choice: what Nia ate, how much she rested, which doctor she saw. When Nia expressed discomfort, Margaret framed it as incompetence. "Pregnancy is natural," she would say. "Women have done it for centuries. If it's so difficult for her, perhaps she is not strong enough." Joseph had heard those words. He had done nothing. Nia stopped arguing. She stopped explaining. She stopped asking Joseph to intervene. Instead, she withdrew, her smiles growing thinner, her laughter quieter. At night, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, her hand resting protectively over her belly. Joseph thought she was simply tired. He did not recognize resignation when he saw it. Now, as he watched doctors move in and out of the ICU, the weight of that failure settled heavily on his chest. Stress was not just an emotion, it was a physiological force capable of tightening blood vessels, raising pressure, silencing the body's ability to heal. And Nia's body had been screaming for relief. A nurse approached quietly. "Mr. Mwangi, we're adjusting her medication again." Joseph nodded absently. "Is she in pain?" he asked. The nurse hesitated. "She's not conscious, but the body remembers." That phrase again. Joseph swallowed hard. Later that afternoon, Margaret arrived once more, her face set in practiced concern. She sat beside Joseph, smoothing her skirt. "You must stay strong," she said. "This is not the time for weakness." Joseph stared ahead. "Whose weakness?" Margaret blinked. "Joseph." "Do you know," he continued, his voice low, controlled, "that Nia asked me once if she was a burden to this family?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "She is sensitive. That is not my fault." Joseph turned to her slowly. "She asked because someone made her feel that way." Margaret's lips tightened. "I only wanted what was best for you, for this family." "And what about what was best for her?" Joseph asked quietly. The question hung between them unanswered. Margaret stood after a moment. "You're exhausted. You're not thinking clearly." Joseph watched her walk away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. For the first time, he did not follow. That evening, Joseph asked the nurses to leave him alone with Nia, even if only for a moment. They hesitated, but agreed. Inside the ICU, the lights were dimmer. Nia's face looked fragile, her skin pale against the white sheets. Tubes and wires surrounded her like barriers he could not cross. Joseph took her hand gently. "I should have protected you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have listened." Her hand did not move. "I thought keeping the peace was the same as love," he continued. "I was wrong." The monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to his confession. Joseph rested his forehead against the edge of the bed. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry, not quietly, not strategically, but openly. The tears came with shame, with regret, with the unbearable knowledge that apologies spoken too late often echo unanswered. Outside the room, Dr. Thibault watched through the glass, his expression heavy. Later that night, the doctors gathered again, though fewer words were exchanged this time. There were no new options to discuss, only limits. "We can sustain her for now," Dr. Thabo said. but the underlying stress response remains unresolved. Joseph looked up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the doctor replied carefully, "that unless something changes, something fundamental, we may not win this." Joseph nodded slowly. In the far corner of the corridor, Sister Ruth Adebayo remained seated, her presence unnoticed by most. She had watched the patterns too, the way nurses whispered, the way Joseph's shoulders had begun to curve inward under the weight of guilt. She recognized the signs. She had seen them before. Years ago, when she herself had been younger, desperate unseen. Naya had been one of the few who noticed her, then offering food conversation dignity without question. Naya had listened when no one else had. She had given without measuring worth. Sister Ruth closed her eyes briefly, her lips moving in silent prayer, not for a miracle, but for an opening. Back inside the ICU, Nia's body trembled slightly, her heart rate fluctuating once more. The alarms did not sound yet, but they hovered close. Joseph stood abruptly as the numbers shifted again. "Doctor!" he called out. "What's happening?" Dr. Thabo stepped forward. "Her stress levels are spiking again." Joseph's breath caught. "Then we need to remove the source." Dr. Thabo studied him. "And what do you believe that source is?" Joseph didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted down the corridor to the doors, the people, the walls that had witnessed every silent harm. Then finally his eyes fell on the elderly nun sitting quietly, her hands folded, her posture calm amid the storm. For reasons he could not explain, something in him stilled. "Who is she?" he asked. Dr. Thabo followed his gaze. "I don't know," he said. "She's been here most of the day." Joseph stood there watching Sister Ruth as if seeing her for the first time. He did not yet understand her role. He did not yet know her history. But for the first time since Naya had collapsed, Joseph Mwangi felt something shift, small, fragile, but real. Not hope born of control, but hope born of humility. Sister Ruth Adebayo had learned long ago how to become invisible. In hospitals, people looked past her. In busy corridors, they mistook her stillness for irrelevance. The faded habit she wore did not command attention the way tailored suits or white coats did. It was practical, worn thin at the elbows, the fabric softened by years of washing. She carried no bag except a small cloth satchel, no documents except the quiet authority of purpose. She had not come to the hospital by accident. That morning she had woken before dawn in the modest convent where she lived on the outskirts of Nairobi. She had felt an unease she could not name, a heaviness in her chest that prayer alone did not lift. It was the kind of feeling she had learned to respect, the kind that arrived without explanation, but never without reason. So she had taken the bus into the city. When she reached the hospital gates, she heard whispers even before she entered. A billionaire's wife. A complicated pregnancy, doctors flying in from across the continent, hope thinning by the hour. Sister Ruth listened quietly, her face calm, her eyes alert. Inside the building, the air was cold and antiseptic. She moved slowly, letting the rhythm of the place reveal itself. She followed the tension, the pauses in conversation, the way nurses' voices softened near one particular corridor. That was where she stopped. Outside the ICU, she saw Joseph Mwangi for the first time, not as a name or a figure from newspapers, but as a man folded inward by fear. She recognized that posture instantly. She had seen it in fathers, in husbands, in herself once upon a time. And behind the glass, she saw Nia. Even beneath tubes and wires, Sister Ruth knew her. Not because of her face, though it had not changed as much as time might suggest, but because of the quiet dignity that clung to her even now. The same dignity she had carried years ago, in a dusty alley offering food to a stranger no one else would touch. Sister Ruth's hands tightened around the strap of her satchel. She stepped forward. The first person to stop her was security. "Ma'am, you can't be here." The guard said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I need to see her," Sister Ruth replied softly. Family only. I am not family by blood, she said. But I am connected. The guard frowned. You'll have to leave. She nodded once as if she had expected this. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood there waiting. People passed. Doctors moved in and out. No one paid her much attention, until she spoke again. What is her name? She asked the nurse who had just stepped out of the ICU. The nurse hesitated, then answered automatically. Nia Mwangi. Sister Ruth closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her gaze was steady. Please tell her I am here. The nurse stared at her. She's unconscious. Tell her anyway. The nurse shook her head, unsettled, and walked away. Joseph noticed the exchange from across the corridor. At first, he assumed Sister Ruth was just another well-wisher, someone drawn by tragedy hoping to offer prayers. But something about her stillness caught his attention. She was not anxious. She was not pleading. She simply waited as if time were something she trusted. When the nurse returned to Joseph moments later, her voice was uncertain. There's a woman asking to see Mrs. Mwangi, a nun. Joseph frowned, on whose authorization she didn't give one. But she knows Mrs. Mwangi's name, and she called her by a nickname. Joseph's chest tightened. What nickname? The nurse swallowed. Nia. No one in this building called his wife that. Not the doctors, not the administrators, not even him anymore. Joseph stood. He walked toward Sister Ruth, slowly studying her face. She did not look at him until he was directly in front of her. You asked to see my wife, he said. Yes, she replied simply. Why? Because she once saw me, Sister Ruth answered. Joseph searched her expression for manipulation, for desperation, for any sign of intrusion. He found none. Security stepped closer. Sir, if you want her removed, wait, Joseph said. He turned back to Sister Ruth. How do you know? Nia pause. She fed me, Sister Ruth said, when I had nothing. She spoke to me when everyone else turned away. She did not ask who I was or why I was there. She just saw a human being. Joseph felt something twist inside him. That was years ago, he said quietly. Yes, Sister Ruth agreed, but kindness does not expire. Before Joseph could respond, an alarm sounded from inside the ICU. Sharp, urgent. Nurses rushed past them. Doctors followed. Joseph's heart lurched. What's happening? Dr. Thabo emerged moments later, his face tight. Her heart rate is destabilizing again. The baby's oxygen levels are dropping. Joseph's breath came shallow. Then do something. We are doctor, Thabo said. But she's not responding. Sister Ruth stepped forward instinctively. May I go in now? Dr. Thabo looked at her sharply. Absolutely not. Joseph hesitated. The words rose in him before logic could stop them. Why does she keep reacting like this? Dr. Thabo exhaled. Because her body is under sustained distress. It's as if it doesn't feel safe. Joseph's gaze drifted back to Sister Ruth. Safe. The word echoed. Sister Ruth met his eyes. She has been carrying more than a child, she said gently. Security moved to intervene again. Sir, this is inappropriate. Joseph raised a hand. He looked at Sister Ruth, then at the ICU doors, then back again. Every instinct he had built his life on urged him to take control, to assert authority, to rely on protocol. But something else, something quieter, spoke now. What would you do? He asked her. I would remind her. Sister Ruth replied that she is not alone, that she is not unwanted, that she is not a burden. Doctor. Thabo stiffened. This is not medical treatment. No, Sister Ruth said. It is human. Joseph's jaw tightened. If I let you in, he said slowly, and something goes wrong, I will not touch a single machine, she interrupted. I will not interfere with your doctors. I will only speak. Joseph closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the monitor inside the ICU let out another warning beep. Low, insistent. Time was thinning. He looked at Dr. Thabo. "If we do nothing different," he asked quietly, "what happens?" The doctor hesitated. "We continue to lose ground." Joseph turned back to Sister Ruth. 5 minutes, he said. "That's all I can give you." Security protested. Doctors objected. Joseph did not listen. 5 minutes, he repeated, "and I take full responsibility." The doors to the ICU opened. Sister Ruth stepped forward without hesitation, her movements calm, deliberate. As she passed Joseph, she paused just long enough to say one thing. "You are not too late," she whispered. "But you must stop standing between her and peace." Joseph watched as the doors closed behind her. For the first time since Nia had collapsed, he did not feel in control, and for the first time, he did not want to be. The moment the ICU doors closed behind Sister Ruth Adebayo, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Inside the room, the air felt heavier, not with fear but with something unspoken. Machines continued their steady rhythm. Lights glowed softly, and the smell of antiseptic lingered. Nia Mwangi lay motionless, her face pale, her lashes resting against her cheeks like shadows. The monitors traced her struggle in numbers and lines indifferent to the story behind them. Sister Ruth stood still for a few seconds, letting herself arrive fully. She did not rush. She did not look at the machines first. She looked at Nia. "My child." She whispered, her voice barely louder than breath. She pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat careful not to disturb the tubes. Her hands rested in her lap, steady, practiced. For years she had sat like this beside the sick, the grieving, the forgotten. She knew when silence was needed and when it was time to speak. Outside the glass, Joseph Mwangi watched his heart pounding. Every instinct in him screamed that this was reckless, irrational, and yet he could not look away. Sister Ruth leaned forward slightly close enough for Nia to hear if any part of her still could. "I don't know if you remember me," she said softly. "But I remember you." The machines hummed on. "I remember the day you brought me food when I had not eaten in 2 days. I remember how you sat with me, even though you were late for work. You did not ask me who I was. You did not ask what I could give you in return." Her voice trembled just slightly. "You told me I mattered." Outside, Joseph felt his throat tighten. The words stirred something deep, something he had not allowed himself to examine. He remembered Nia telling him once about a woman she used to help near the outreach center. He had nodded distractedly, already thinking about something else. Sister Ruth reached out now, placing 2 fingers gently on Nia's wrist, not to feel a pulse, but to connect. "You have been strong for too long," she continued. "You have carried silence like a duty, but strength is not the same as safety." The fetal monitor flickered, the rhythm shifting slightly. A nurse noticed from outside and leaned closer to the glass. Dr. Thabo frowned but said nothing. Sister Ruth closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering something from deep within herself. "There was a time," she said, "when I was like you. I carried a child once. I carried fear. I carried shame that was never mine to bear." Her voice softened further. "I lost that child. And when I did, I lost myself." The words landed gently in the room. "I thought God had abandoned me, but he did not. He was waiting for me to stop fighting alone." She opened her eyes again, her gaze steady on Nia's face. "You are allowed to rest," she whispered. "You are allowed to be held. You do not have to prove your worth with suffering." The machines let out a subtle change in tone, not an alarm but a recalibration. Outside the room, Dr. Thabo straightened. "What just changed?" he murmured. The nurse checked the screen. "Her blood pressure. It's lowering, slowly." Joseph's breath caught. Inside, Sister Ruth continued, unaware or unconcerned with the numbers. "You are not unwanted," she said. "Not by your child, not by this world, and not by the man who loves you even if he forgot how to show it." Joseph felt the words strike him like a confession spoken aloud. Sister Ruth's voice steadied. "Let go, Nia. Just a little. Let your body breathe." She fell silent, then resting her hand lightly on the bed near Nia's arm. Not touching skin, just present. Minutes passed. No one spoke. The monitors traced a different story now, not victory, not certainty, but a subtle shift. The erratic lines began to smooth. The baby's heart rate steadied, no longer plunging without warning. Dr. Thabo stared at the screen, disbelief flickering across his face. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. Joseph's legs felt weak. He gripped the back of a chair, his eyes fixed on the room beyond the glass. Inside, Sister Ruth finally stood. She leaned close one last time. "I am here," she said. "But more importantly, he is here too." She glanced toward the glass wall, toward Joseph. "You are not alone," she repeated. Then she stepped back. When the ICU doors opened, the tension rushed out like released breath. Nurses moved quickly to check readings. Doctors followed their expressions, cautious but alert. Dr. Thabo approached Sister Ruth, his professional distance shaken. "What did you do?" She met his gaze calmly. "I reminded her who she is." "That's not an answer," he said. "It is the only one I have." Joseph stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "The numbers, are they really improving, Doctor?" Thabo nodded slowly. "They are stabilizing. I don't know how long it will last, but something has changed." Joseph looked at Sister Ruth, awe and confusion mingling in his eyes. "You said you knew her?" "Yes," Sister Ruth replied, "from before she became invisible." Joseph swallowed. "She told me once about helping a woman on the street. I didn't listen." Sister Ruth studied him. "Listening is a form of love," she said gently. "It is never too late to learn it." A nurse interrupted. "Doctor, the baby's oxygen levels are holding." The corridor buzzed with cautious movement. Joseph exhaled shakily, his shoulders sagging as if a weight had shifted. Not lifted, but moved to a place he could finally acknowledge. He turned to Sister Ruth. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why come back after all this time?" Sister Ruth adjusted her satchel. "Because kindness travels in circles," she said, "and because when the body cries out, the soul must be answered." She began to walk away. Joseph stepped after her. "Wait. She paused, turning back. "Your wife needs peace," she said, "not gratitude, not spectacle." Joseph nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I failed her." Sister Ruth's gaze softened. "Failure is not final," she said. "Refusal to change is." She looked once more through the glass at Nia, now resting more evenly. "I will return if I am needed," she added. "But what happens next is in your hands." As she disappeared down the corridor, Joseph remained standing, shaken to his core. For the first time, he understood something the doctor's charts could not show, that Nia's body had not been betraying her. It had been telling the truth all along, and now that truth, long ignored, had finally been heard. The improvement did not bring celebration. It brought suspicion. In a hospital built on protocol and reputation, unexplained stability was almost as unsettling as decline. Dr. Thabo and Lovu walked beside Joseph down the corridor, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking toward the ICU door, as if the numbers might change again at any second. "You understand," Dr. Thabo said quietly, "that this doesn't mean she's safe." Joseph nodded, still shaken. "I know. And you understand that allowing a non-medical person into ICU, especially during a critical pregnancy, could expose the hospital to legal consequences." Joseph's voice was tired. "I take responsibility." Dr. Thabo stopped walking. "This is not just about responsibility, Mr. Mwangi. It's about logic. We can't build treatment plans around prayer. Joseph looked at him, eyes red. She didn't pray. She spoke. Dr. Thabo's expression hardened. Words don't reverse physiology. Joseph held the doctor's gaze for a moment, then turned away, unwilling to argue. Logic had always been his weapon, yet logic had failed them 12 times. The only change he had witnessed happened the moment Sister Ruth spoke to Naya like a human being, not a fragile patient or an embarrassing outsider. That thought frightened him, more than it comforted him. Because if words could hurt deeply enough to break a body, then silence could be a form of violence. As the morning unfolded, the hospital became a battlefield of perspectives. The administration asked questions. Nurses whispered. A senior consultant demanded to know who the nun was. Security officers insisted they had simply followed Joseph's orders. Rumors moved faster than facts. Joseph stayed near the ICU, refusing to leave. He watched Naya's chest rise and fall more evenly now, but still fragile. He watched the fetal monitor, trace the baby's heartbeat steady for the moment, but always threatened by the possibility of sudden collapse. Each time the numbers held, Joseph felt a cautious breath of relief. Each time a line wavered, his heart lurched again. He realized he had been living like this for months, his wife quietly struggling while he watched from the outside, convincing himself that not interfering meant not harming. Now he knew better. Margaret Mwangi arrived in the early afternoon, her posture rigid, her face controlled. She moved through the corridor like a woman used to obedience. Joseph saw her coming and felt his stomach tighten. "What is this nonsense I'm hearing?" Margaret asked, stopping in front of him. "A nun in the ICU. Are we running a hospital or a church?" Joseph's voice was calm but strained. She knew Naya. Margaret scoffed. "Everyone knows you once married a girl who did charity work. That doesn't give strangers access to critical care." Joseph's eyes narrowed. "She is not a stranger." Margaret's smile was thin. "To us she is." Joseph felt anger rise sharp, familiar. But this time it did not turn outward. It turned inward, first illuminating all the times he had allowed this same tone to cut into Naya. "You don't get to define who matters," he said quietly. Margaret stiffened. "Joseph, watch your tone." He stood, stepping closer. "No, you watch yours." Silence snapped between them. Margaret looked genuinely shocked. "Are you blaming me for what's happening?" Joseph swallowed hard. "I'm blaming myself for letting you treat her like she wasn't family." Margaret's eyes flashed. "I wanted the best for you, and I wanted the best for her," Joseph said, voice cracking. "But I didn't act like it." Margaret's face hardened. "This is emotional. You are exhausted. You will regret speaking to me this way." Joseph exhaled, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I regret not speaking sooner." A nurse approached, nervously interrupting, before Margaret could respond. "Mr. Mwangi, Dr. Thabo wants to see you." Joseph followed the nurse, leaving Margaret standing in the corridor, her pride bruised. In the doctor's office, Dr. Thabo closed the door and leaned against his desk. His expression was controlled, but his eyes carried frustration. "The board is concerned," he said. "We have donors, investors, and media attention on this case. The moment word spreads that we allowed spiritual intervention in ICU, our credibility becomes a joke." Joseph's jaw clenched. "My wife isn't a brand, she's a person." Dr. Thabo's voice sharpened. "And if she dies, Mr. Mwangi, you think public opinion will care about your moral awakening? They will tear this hospital apart. They will say we abandoned medicine." Joseph paced once, then stopped. "Then keep it quiet." Dr. Thabo shook his head. "It's already not quiet." Joseph's phone buzzed messages from journalists, executives, associates. The city had begun to sniff at the edges of the story. Dr. Thabo continued. "I'm not saying Sister Ruth caused harm. I'm saying we can't create a precedent. Joseph looked at the doctor, his voice low. What if the precedent saves her life? Dr. Thabo's lips pressed into a thin line. This is not a debate about philosophy. It's about control. Joseph laughed bitterly. Control, he echoed. That's the word that brought us here. Dr. Thabo's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Joseph's shoulders sagged. I controlled everything around Nia. Her doctors, her schedule, her environment. I thought I was protecting her, but I never protected her from what actually hurt. Dr. Thabo looked away briefly, uncomfortable. We need to focus on her medical condition. Joseph nodded. Then focus. But don't ask me to deny what I saw. When Joseph returned to the ICU corridor, Sister Ruth was not there. The absence felt strange, like a doorway closing. He asked a nurse quietly, "Has the nun returned?" The nurse shook her head. "No, sir. Security was instructed not to let her in again." Joseph's chest tightened. "By who?" The nurse hesitated. "The administration, and your mother spoke to them." Joseph's blood ran cold. He turned sharply and found Margaret down the corridor speaking calmly to a security supervisor. She looked up as Joseph approached as if she had been waiting for this confrontation. "You told them to block her," Joseph said. Margaret lifted her chin. "Of course, she is inappropriate. You are desperate, and desperate men make foolish decisions." Joseph's fists tightened at his sides. She helped Nia stabilize. "That is coincidence," Margaret snapped. "You are clinging to superstition because you can't handle the truth." Joseph stepped closer, his voice trembling with rage and grief. "The truth is my wife has been suffering and you never cared. You cared about appearances." Margaret's eyes flashed. "I cared about my son." Joseph's voice rose, breaking through the corridor's hushed atmosphere. "And I care about my wife." Nurses paused. A doctor looked up. The corridor's quiet tension snapped into attention. Margaret's face turned rigid, her voice cold. "You will not embarrass me in public." Joseph's eyes burned. "Then stop doing things that deserve embarrassment." For a moment, Margaret looked as if she might slap him, but she held herself back, breathing sharply. Joseph turned away, shaking, and walked toward the ICU doors. He pressed his hand against the glass, watching Nia inside. She looked calmer, but her face was still pale, her body still fragile. He whispered to himself, "Please hold on." Behind him, Dr. Thabo approached cautiously. "Joseph," he said quietly, dropping the formal title for the first time. "We need to keep her stable. Stress in the corridor isn't helping." Joseph swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. "Then we need her peace," he said. "Not just medicine." Dr. Thabo hesitated. "And you think that none is peace?" Joseph looked at him, eyes wet. "I think she's truth," he said, "and truth is the only thing my wife has been denied." As if the hospital itself responded to the tension, a monitor inside the ICU beeped sharply, once then again. A nurse rushed out. "Doctor, her blood pressure is spiking." Joseph's heart dropped. Dr. Thabo ran toward the door, barking orders. Joseph followed, panic rising again like a wave. Through the glass, he saw Nia's body tense slightly, her breathing changing, the fetal monitor flickering. The stability was breaking. Joseph spun toward the corridor where Sister Ruth had last stood, his voice shaking. "Find her," he demanded. "Please find her." But the security supervisor only looked helpless. "Sir, she's gone." Joseph felt the ground tilt beneath him. For the first time, he understood the cruel irony. He had spent his life believing money could bring help instantly, but the one person who had helped without money had been pushed away by pride. And now, as Nia's body began to spiral again, Joseph Mwangi realized that the battle was no longer only inside the ICU. It was in the heart of his family, and time was running out. The alarm's shrill cry cut through the corridor like a blade. Nurses sprinted past Joseph Mwangi, their shoes slapping against the polished floor as they rushed into the ICU. A doctor shouted instructions. Another grabbed a crash cart. The steady order of the hospital fractured into controlled chaos, and Joseph stood frozen at its center, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Inside the room, Naya's body had begun to betray the fragile calm she had found earlier. Her blood pressure surged dangerously, the numbers on the monitor climbing too fast, too high. The fetal heart rate dipped again, hovering at the edge of disaster. Dr. Thabo and Lovu took command, his voice firm, professional. Increase oxygen. Prepare emergency intervention. We may have to act now. Joseph pressed his hand against the glass, watching helplessly as doctors surrounded Naya's bed. He could see her brow furrow slightly, her body tensing as if fighting an invisible force. She was unconscious but not unaware. Something inside her was resisting, panicking, tightening. "She's spiraling," a nurse said urgently. Dr. Thabo's jaw clenched. "We're losing the balance." Joseph's mind raced. The images from earlier. The way Sister Ruth's voice had steadied the room. The way the monitors had softened, the way Nia's body had seemed to exhale for the first time in days, flooded back with cruel clarity. He turned sharply toward the security supervisor. "I told you to find her." The man shook his head, sweat beading at his temples. "Sir, she left the premises. We don't know where Joseph cut him off. Then look harder." Margaret Mwangi stood a few steps away, pale but composed, her hands clasped tightly. "Joseph," she said, trying to sound calm. "This is exactly why we can't rely on outsiders. This is medicine, not emotion." Joseph rounded on her, his voice breaking. "Emotion is what's killing her." Margaret recoiled slightly. "How dare you? I dare because my wife is dying," Joseph snapped, "and because I let you silence her for too long." Dr. Thabo stepped out of the ICU, briefly, his face grim. "Joseph," he said, lowering his voice, "we're approaching a point where we must decide." Joseph felt the world tilt. "Decide what if her condition worsens further," the doctor said carefully. "We may have to prioritize the baby. Or the mother." The words landed like a physical blow. Joseph staggered back, gripping the edge of a chair. "You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to prepare," Dr. Thabo replied softly, "because we may not have time later." Margaret stepped forward quickly. "The baby must come first," she said without hesitation. "It's the future of this family." Joseph turned to her slowly, disbelief and rage twisting his features. "You're talking about her like she's already gone." Margaret's lips trembled. "Joseph, you must think rationally." "No," he said hoarsely. "I must think humanly." Inside the ICU, another alarm sounded. A nurse shouted, "Doctor, her oxygen levels are dropping." Dr. Thabo cursed under his breath and turned back toward the room. "I need an answer soon." Joseph's chest felt tight, his breath shallow. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and in that darkness, memories rushed in. Naya's quiet smile, her gentle stubbornness, the way she had once said, "I just want to feel safe." Safe. That was the word. Joseph opened his eyes and saw the corridor clearly for the first time. Not the machines, not the power struggles, not the reputations at stake, but the human cost of every delay, every silence, every compromise he had made. He straightened suddenly. "Find Sister Ruth," he said again, his voice raw but resolute. "And if she comes back, no one stops her." Margaret gasped. "Joseph, you can't be serious." He turned on her. "I am more serious than I've ever been." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are risking everything. Your name, your business, this hospital. Joseph met her gaze without flinching, then let it all burn. He said, "I won't bury my wife to protect my pride." Margaret stared at him, stunned into silence. At that moment, a nurse rushed out, her face pale. "Doctor, we're losing the fetal heartbeat." Joseph felt something inside him break. "Do whatever you have to do," he whispered to Dr. Thabo. "Just don't give up on her." Dr. Thabo nodded once and rushed back into the ICU. Joseph stood alone now, surrounded by the hum of machines and the weight of consequences. He pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling hands and scrolled through contacts he had not used in years. Driver's aides, personal assistants. "Find Sister Ruth Adebayo," he said the moment one answered. "She's a nun, elderly, wears a faded habit. I don't care how you do it, just find her." He ended the call and pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the ICU door. Inside, Nia's body convulsed slightly, her breathing shallow, uneven. Doctors worked quickly, their movements precise but urgent. The baby's heart rate flickered dangerously low, then climbed just enough to taunt them with hope. "Joseph," whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. I'm listening now." Minutes passed like hours. Then at the far end of the corridor, a murmur rippled through the staff. Heads turned. Security stiffened. Joseph looked up and his heart leapt. Sister Ruth Adebayo stood at the entrance, slightly breathless, her habit dusted from the street. She looked smaller than before, more fragile. But her eyes were steady, burning with purpose. "Stop her!" a security officer began. Joseph's voice thundered across the corridor. "No one touches her." The room froze. Sister Ruth walked forward, her gaze fixed on the ICU doors. "She called," she said softly. Joseph swallowed. "We need you," he said, his voice barely holding together. "Please, Doctor." Thabo emerged from the ICU, just as Sister Ruth reached them. "This is highly irregular," he said, torn between desperation and duty. Sister Ruth met his eyes calmly. "So is suffering," she replied. "But it doesn't make it less real." Another alarm sounded from inside the ICU, short, urgent. Dr. Thabo closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a look of hard decision. "5 minutes," he said. "That's all." Sister Ruth nodded and turned toward the door. Joseph stepped in front of her suddenly, his voice trembling. "If anything happens, if we lose them..." She placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. "Then you will still have to live with how you loved," she said quietly. "Choose that carefully." The ICU doors opened once more. As Sister Ruth stepped inside, Joseph felt the air shift again. Not with certainty, not with relief, but with something deeper. Surrender. He watched through the glass as she approached Nia's bedside, her presence calm amid the frantic movement of doctors. The machines continued their relentless rhythm, the baby's heart rate still fragile, still fighting. Joseph pressed his hand against the glass, tears streaming freely now. For the first time in his life, he was not trying to control the outcome. He was simply asking for mercy. Inside the ICU, the world narrowed to breath, sound, and presence. Sister Ruth Adebayo moved with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the urgency around her. Doctors adjusted monitors. Nurses whispered updates. The machines sang their thin, anxious chorus. Yet she walked as if there were no clocks ticking, as if the room itself had asked her to slow down. She did not touch the machines. She did not interrupt the work of the doctors. She pulled the chair closer to Nia's bed and sat, aligning herself with the rhythm of Nia's breathing, rather than the rhythm of the alarms. "Nia," she said softly. "It's Ruth." The name traveled into the room like a remembered song. Outside the glass, Joseph Mwangi leaned forward, his hands pressed together so tightly they shook. He could see Sister Ruth's lips move, could see the calm in her posture, but not hear the words. And somehow that made it worse. He wanted to hear. He wanted to know what was being said that medicine could not say. Inside, Sister Ruth continued, her voice low and steady. "You don't have to fight anymore," she murmured. "Not everything, not everyone." She glanced at the monitors, not with fear but with awareness, then back to Nia's face. "For so long you have been holding your breath," she said, "holding your tongue, holding your pain so others could stay comfortable." The baby's heartbeat flickered, then steadied just enough to draw a nurse's attention. The nurse frowned, leaned closer, then glanced at Dr. Thabo with cautious surprise. Sister Ruth closed her eyes briefly, gathering courage from memory. "I remember how you used to sit with me on the curb," she said. "How you listened when I told you about my child. How you didn't rush me even when you were late. You let me speak until my hands stopped shaking." Her voice softened further. "You gave me permission to grieve. You told me grief did not make me weak." The words hung in the air, tender and deliberate. "Nia," she whispered, "you deserve that same permission." A subtle change passed through Nia's body, a loosening almost imperceptible. Her brow smoothed slightly, her shoulders once tense, even in unconsciousness, relaxed by a fraction. Outside, Dr. Thabo straightened. "Her heart rate is responding," he murmured. Joseph's breath caught. Inside, Sister Ruth leaned closer, careful not to disturb the tubes. "You are not a burden," she said firmly now, as if speaking against a lie that had taken root too deeply. "You never were. Not to your child, not to this world." The fetal monitor dipped briefly, then climbed again higher than it had been in hours. A nurse whispered, "Doctor, look." Dr. Thabo stared at the screen, his disbelief plain. "That shouldn't be happening." Joseph pressed his forehead to the glass, tears blurring his vision. Sister Ruth's voice remained calm, unhurried. "There are words that wound deeper than knives," she said, "and there are silences that starve the body. You have lived in both." She paused, then added, "But you are allowed to choose differently now." The room seemed to listen. Sister Ruth reached into her satchel and pulled out a small worn cloth, a simple handkerchief. She held it near Nia's hand, not touching skin, just close enough to be felt. "Breathe," she whispered. "Let the fear pass through you. Let the love stay." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Nia's breathing changed. It deepened. A nurse gasped softly. "Her oxygen saturation is improving." Dr. Thabo moved closer, eyes locked on the monitors. "Steady. Keep it steady." Outside, Joseph felt his legs weaken. He sank into a chair, his chest heaving. He watched as the lines on the screen smoothed the frantic spikes, giving way to a slower, more stable rhythm. Inside, Sister Ruth fell silent again, allowing the space she had opened to do its work. Minutes passed. The alarms did not return. The fetal heartbeat stabilized at a level the doctors had not seen since Nia's admission. Her blood pressure lowered, not suddenly, but gradually, like a body remembering how to rest. Dr. Thabo looked from the monitors to Sister Ruth, his professional certainty shaken. "I don't understand this," he said quietly. She looked at him with kindness. "Understanding is not required for respect," she replied. Joseph stood again, his hands trembling as he watched. He felt something shift inside him, something heavy and old loosening its grip. He remembered the promise he had made Nia years ago. "I will protect you." He understood now how poorly he had kept it. Inside the ICU, Sister Ruth finally stood. She leaned close one last time. "You are safe," she whispered. "For now. Rest." She stepped back, giving the doctor's room. Dr. Thabo exhaled slowly. "We're stabilizing her," he said to the team. "Careful monitoring. No sudden changes." He turned to Sister Ruth. "You should leave now." She nodded. "I was never meant to stay." As she walked toward the door, Joseph met her at the threshold, his eyes red, his voice unsteady. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't deserve this." Sister Ruth met his gaze. "Gratitude is not owed," she said gently. "Change is." Joseph nodded, tears spilling freely. "I will do better." "See that you do," she replied. "For her, and for yourself." She stepped out into the corridor, her presence receding quietly, leaving behind a room that felt, if not healed, then finally heard. Dr. Thabo addressed the staff, his voice firm, but softened by humility. "We proceed carefully. She's still critical. But we have time. Time." The word settled into Joseph's chest like a fragile gift. He returned to the glass wall and watched Naya rest her breathing, even the baby's heartbeat steady for the first time in days. He placed his palm against the glass and whispered, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since the nightmare began, the machines did not argue. The hospital did not celebrate the night's turn. No announcements were made. No relieved smiles lingered too long. In medicine, improvement without explanation was treated with caution, almost suspicion. And yet, as dawn crept through the narrow windows of the ICU corridor, something undeniable settled into the airspace. Time had returned. Dr. Thabo and Lovu stood at the foot of Nia Mwangi's bed, reviewing the monitors for the third time in as many minutes. The numbers held. Not perfect, not safe, but no longer hostile. "She's maintaining," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. A nurse nodded. "Blood pressure is stable within acceptable range. Oxygen saturation remains improved. Fetal heart rate is steady." Joseph Mwangi, who had not slept, barely moved. He stood by the glass wall, eyes fixed on Nia as if blinking might break the fragile calm. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm that felt almost miraculous after days of struggle. For the first time since she had collapsed, her body was no longer fighting itself. Joseph pressed his palm against the glass, the same place where he had stood through hours of fear. But now the feeling beneath his hand was different. Not desperation, but reverence. Dr. Thabo stepped closer to him. "We can't say she's out of danger," he cautioned. "But whatever happened last night, it allowed her system to reset." Joseph swallowed. "You mean the nun?" Dr. Thabo hesitated. "I mean, something changed." Joseph nodded slowly. He did not argue. He did not need the doctor to say it. Later that morning, the hospital board convened an emergency meeting. Administrators spoke in careful language about risk, reputation, and protocol. Lawyers asked questions about authorization. Donors demanded reassurance. Joseph attended, but he did not dominate the room, as he once would have. He listened. When they suggested restricting access to Nia's room further, he agreed, but with one condition. "No more visitors who bring pressure," he said. "No more opinions disguised as concern." Margaret Mwangi was not invited to return that day. Joseph sent the message himself. He returned to the ICU corridor alone, the weight of that decision settling heavily, but not regretfully, on his shoulders. For the first time, he felt aligned with his conscience instead of divided against it. Inside the room, Naya stirred faintly. A nurse leaned closer, checking her vitals. "Doctor," she whispered. "I think she's responding." Dr. Thabo moved to Nia's side. "Nia," he said gently, "if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, barely perceptible, Nia's fingers twitched. Joseph's breath caught painfully in his chest. "That's a reflex," a nurse murmured. Dr. Thabo shook his head slowly. "No, that's intentional." Joseph stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Nia." Her eyelids fluttered. The room seemed to tilt. "Nia." Dr. Thabo repeated softly. "You're in the hospital. You're safe." Her eyes opened just a fraction, unfocused and heavy. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Joseph moved instinctively, stopping himself only when the nurse raised a hand. "Careful," she whispered. Tears streamed down Joseph's face, unchecked. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm right here." Nia's gaze shifted slowly, finding him at the edge of her vision. Confusion passed across her face, then something deeper, recognition. Her lips moved again. Joseph leaned closer. Heart pounding. "What is it? What are you trying to say?" Her voice, when it came, was barely more than breath. "Don't. Let her." The words faded before they could finish. Joseph nodded immediately, his voice firm despite the tears. "I won't," he promised. "I swear I won't." Her fingers tightened weakly around the sheet, then relaxed. Dr. Thabo straightened his eyes bright with cautious relief. "She's conscious," he said. "Weak but conscious." The nurses moved with renewed focus, adjusting monitors, administering careful doses of medication. The room buzzed again, but now with purpose instead of panic. Outside, the sun rose fully over Nairobi, casting pale light across the city. Traffic resumed. Vendors opened their stalls. Life continued, unaware that within the walls of one hospital, a woman had just crossed back from the edge. Joseph stepped back, giving the medical team space, his chest heaving with emotion he could no longer suppress. He leaned against the wall, covering his face with his hands. He had built entire systems to avoid moments like this, moments where nothing could be controlled, predicted, or bought. And yet it was here on the other side of fear that he felt most alive. Dr. Thabo joined him quietly. "You did the right thing," he said after a moment. Joseph looked up, eyes red. "I almost didn't. But you did." Joseph nodded slowly. "I spent my life thinking strength meant control, that love meant provision." Dr. Thabo listened. "I forgot that safety," Joseph continued, "means being seen." Dr. Thabo placed a hand on his shoulder briefly. "Medicine can support the body," he said, "but the body listens to the soul." Joseph thought of Sister Ruth, then her calm, her certainty, the way she had spoken, not as a healer, but as a witness. Later that afternoon, as Nia drifted back into sleep, this time restful, not forced, Joseph sat beside her bed. He did not speak much. He did not apologize yet. He simply stayed. He watched the gentle rise of her chest, the steady beat of the baby's heart on the monitor, the fragile peace that had finally been allowed to exist. In the quiet, Joseph made a silent vow, not to fix everything at once, not to undo the past with grand gestures, but to listen, to protect without silencing, to love without conditions. Outside the ICU, the hospital resumed its rhythm. Doctors moved on to other patients. Administrators drafted statements. The world reclaimed its noise. But in that room, a woman rested no longer, fighting alone. And a man began for the first time to understand what it meant to truly stand beside her. When Sister Ruth Adebayo returned 3 days later, the hospital felt different. The urgency that once clung to the ICU corridor had softened into watchful calm. Nurses spoke in measured tones. Doctors moved without rushing. The alarms still existed, but they no longer dominated the air. Nia Mwangi slept more naturally now, waking in short, fragile intervals, before drifting back under her body, conserving strength instead of burning it. Joseph Mwangi was there when Sister Ruth arrived. He had not left the hospital, except to shower and change clothes. The sharp edges of his tailored suit were gone, replaced by something looser, less armored. He stood when he saw her, a reflex of respect rather than power. "You came back," he said quietly. Sister Ruth nodded. "I said I would return if I was needed." Joseph swallowed. "She's awake, weak but stable." "I know," Sister Ruth replied. "The body speaks before the mouth does." They walked together toward the ICU doors. This time no one stopped her. Security nodded respectfully. Nurses stepped aside. Even the hospital administrators, alerted but restrained, did not interfere. Inside, Naya's eyes opened when she heard the soft sound of footsteps. Her gaze found Sister Ruth immediately. Tears filled her eyes. "You came," Nia whispered, her voice thin but unmistakably alive. Sister Ruth moved to her side, careful, deliberate. "I told you I would." Nia's fingers trembled as she reached out, stopping just short of contact. "I thought. I dreamed you." Sister Ruth smiled gently. Dreams are sometimes memories waiting to be claimed. Joseph stood back, giving them space, his heart pounding. He watched as the two women, bound not by blood or status, but by something far older, looked at each other with recognition. Nia swallowed hard. "I never forgot you," she said. "I just didn't know how to find you again." "You don't find kindness," Sister Ruth replied softly. "It finds you when you need it." Nia's breathing hitched. "I was so tired." Sister Ruth nodded. "I know." Joseph felt the weight of those words press against his chest. He stepped forward cautiously. "Sister Ruth," he said, voice unsteady. "Nia told me about you once, years ago. I didn't listen." Sister Ruth turned to him calmly. "You are listening now." Joseph nodded, eyes burning. "I owe you." "No," she said gently, cutting him off. "You owe her." Nia's gaze shifted to Joseph. There was no accusation in her eyes, only exhaustion and something deeper, more painful. "I didn't want to be strong anymore," she said quietly. "I just wanted to feel safe." Joseph moved closer, taking her hand carefully as if afraid he might break her. "I know," he whispered, "and I failed you." Nia's eyes closed briefly. "You didn't see it," she said. "That hurt more than anything else." Joseph bowed his head. "I see it now, and I won't let it happen again." Sister Ruth watched them in silence, her presence grounding rather than intrusive. After a moment, she spoke again. "There is something you should know," she said, her voice steady but weighted. "About me. About why I recognized your pain so quickly." Nia turned her head slightly. "You don't have to." "I do," Sister Ruth replied, "because truth completes the circle." She took a seat beside the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "Many years ago," she began. "I was not a nun. I was a young woman like you. I loved someone who promised protection, but delivered silence. I carried a child while being told politely, quietly, that I did not belong." Joseph stiffened. "I was sent away," Sister Ruth continued. "Not violently, respectfully, with money, with advice, with instructions to be grateful." Naya's eyes widened. "I lost my child," shortly after Sister Ruth said, her voice steady despite the pain beneath it. "My body could not hold what my heart had been forced to carry alone." Joseph felt the words strike him like a mirror. "That grief nearly destroyed me," she went on. "I wandered for years. I slept on streets. I forgot my own name." Naya squeezed her hand weakly. And then Sister Ruth said, looking at Naya, "You sat beside me. You spoke to me like I still existed. That moment saved my life." Silence filled the room. Joseph felt something break open inside him. Not shame alone, but understanding. The patterns he had inherited. The harm that repeated itself under different names. "I became a nun because I needed to learn how to forgive without disappearing," Sister Ruth said. "And when I heard your name at the hospital, I knew the circle had returned." Nia's tears fell freely now. Joseph's voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what you lost, for what she almost lost, for what I allowed." Sister Ruth looked at him, her gaze firm but kind. "Apologies are seeds," she said. "They only matter if you plant them." Joseph nodded slowly. Later that evening, Dr. Thabo confirmed what everyone had been waiting to hear. "She's improving steadily," he said. "If this continues, we can plan for delivery under controlled conditions. It's still high risk, but it's possible." Joseph exhaled a shaky sound that carried weeks of fear with it. That night he asked that his mother not be allowed to visit. Not yet. He sat beside Nia, instead holding her hand, listening when she spoke about the loneliness, the quiet humiliations, the moments she had swallowed her pain to avoid conflict. He did not interrupt. He did not defend. He listened. Sister Ruth left quietly before dawn, leaving no instructions, no blessings spoken aloud. Only a small note placed gently on the bedside table. "You are enough. Let that be your medicine." Joseph read it twice before folding it carefully and placing it in his pocket. For the first time, the hospital felt like a place of healing, not just survival. And Joseph Mwangi understood that while medicine had saved Nia's body, truth had saved her life. The day Nia went into labor arrived quietly. No sirens announced it. No alarms shattered the morning. It came instead as a subtle shift and unease that crept through her body like a memory returning. She woke before dawn, her breathing shallow, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Joseph," she whispered. He was already awake. Joseph Mwangi had learned to sleep lightly these past weeks, attuned to every change in her breath, every flicker of movement. He sat up immediately, his eyes searching her face. "It's time," she said, fear and calm tangled together in her voice. The medical team moved swiftly, but without panic. Dr. Thabo and Lovu reviewed her charts one final time, his expression serious but no longer grim. "We proceed carefully," he said. "Every step." Nia nodded weakly, her grip tightening around Joseph's hand. "Don't leave," she murmured. "I won't," Joseph said firmly. "Not for a second." As she was wheeled toward the delivery room, Joseph walked beside her, refusing to be separated. He felt the weight of the moment settle over him, not as dread but as responsibility finally accepted. This was not something to manage. It was something to witness. Inside the delivery room, lights glowed softly, deliberately less harsh than before. The machines hummed with restrained vigilance. Nurses moved with calm precision, their voices low, reassuring. Nia's body trembled as the contractions intensified. Pain crossed her face, sharp and unrelenting, but she did not scream. She breathed through it, counting, focusing, as if remembering Sister Ruth's words. "You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be held." Joseph stayed close, murmuring encouragement, wiping sweat from her forehead. He did not tell her to be strong. He did not tell her it would be over soon. He told her he was there. Hours passed, marked only by the rhythm of contractions and whispered instructions. At one point, Nia cried out, not in pain alone, but in fear. "I can't," she sobbed. "I don't think I can do this." Joseph leaned closer, his voice steady, though his heart pounded wildly. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'm here, we're here." Dr. Thabo met Joseph's gaze briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then the moment came, the fragile, terrifying threshold where everything could still be lost. The baby's heart rate dipped sharply. Nurses exchanged quick glances. Dr. Thabo's voice sharpened. "We need to act now." Joseph felt his chest seize as the room shifted into controlled urgency. Instruments were adjusted. Orders were given. Nia gasped, her body tightening, fear flooding her eyes. Joseph held her hand firmly, refusing to let go. "Look at me," he said urgently. "Nia, look at me." Her eyes found his wide and desperate. "You are safe," he said, his voice breaking but unwavering. "I will not let go. Not now. Not ever." Something in her gaze changed. Nia took a deep, trembling breath and pushed with everything she had left. The room held its breath, and then a cry cut through the air, thin, sharp, alive. For a second, no one moved. Then the sound came again, stronger this time, unmistakable. The baby had arrived. Tears blurred Joseph's vision as the nurse lifted the tiny, trembling form, announcing, "It's a boy." Nia collapsed back against the bed, sobbing openly, now her body shaking with release. Joseph let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, his knees nearly giving way as relief crashed over him. Dr. Thabo worked quickly, checking vitals, his face finally breaking into a smile. "He's breathing well," he said. "Strong heart rate." Joseph laughed through tears, pressing his forehead against Naya's. "You did it," he whispered. "You did it." Naya's eyes fluttered open, weak but glowing. "We did," she corrected softly. The baby, small, red-faced, furious at the world, was placed briefly against Nia's chest. Her trembling hands curled instinctively around him, tears streaming freely. Joseph watched, his heart swelling painfully. In that moment, nothing else existed. Not his name, not his wealth, not the battles fought in hospital corridors. There was only this fragile life born from suffering but not defined by it. Later, when Nia had been stabilized and the baby taken for further checks, Joseph sat alone for a moment, his hands still shaking. He pressed them together, overwhelmed. Dr. Thabo approached quietly. "Both mother and child are stable," he said. "We'll monitor closely, but they've crossed the hardest part." Joseph closed his eyes, a long breath leaving him. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. Dr. Thabo hesitated. "You should know there were moments today when medically this should not have gone as well as it did." Joseph nodded. "I know." That evening, as Nia rested in recovery, Sister Ruth Adebayo returned one last time. She stood in the doorway, her expression soft as she took in the sight. Naya sleeping peacefully, the baby resting nearby. Joseph seated close, unwilling to leave even now. "You came," Joseph said quietly, standing. "I felt the circle close," Sister Ruth replied. Naya stirred, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw Sister Ruth, a smile curved faintly across her face. "He's here," she whispered. "He's alive." Sister Ruth nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I knew he would be." Joseph approached her, his voice thick with emotion. "We named him Ethan," he said. "It means strong." Sister Ruth smiled. "Then he carries the right name." She looked at Joseph, her gaze firm. "Remember this day," she said. "Not for the miracle, but for the truth it demanded." Joseph nodded solemnly. "I won't forget." Sister Ruth placed her hand briefly over the baby's blanket, not touching, just acknowledging, and then stepped back. "You have a family now," she said. "Protect it with humility." And with that she turned and walked away, her presence fading as quietly as it had come. Joseph sat back down beside Nia, watching her breathe, watching their son sleep. For the first time, the future did not feel like a project to be built. It felt like a promise to be kept. The world did not rush in immediately after Ethan Mwangi was born. For a brief, protected stretch of time, the hospital room remained a sanctuary, quiet, dimly lit, insulated from opinions and expectations. Naya slept deeply, her body recovering from the long battle it had fought. Ethan lay curled in a clear bassinet beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling with astonishing steadiness. Joseph Mwangi sat between them, unmoving. He watched the minute details, the way Ethan's fingers twitched in sleep, the faint crease between Nia's brows smoothing at last. These small signs felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. They demanded presence, not power. But outside that room, reality waited. By the second day, news had spread. Nurses whispered about the billionaire's miracle baby. Hospital administrators prepared statements. Journalists called Joseph's office relentlessly. And most persistent of all was the question Joseph knew he could not avoid forever. Margaret Mwangi. She arrived unannounced in the early afternoon, dressed in muted elegance, her posture rigid with restrained urgency. She stopped short when she saw Joseph standing in the corridor outside Nia's room, blocking the door. "Move," she said quietly. "I'm here to see my grandson." Joseph did not move. "Not yet," he replied. Margaret's eyes flashed. Joseph, this is absurd. I have every right— No! He interrupted calmly. You don't! The word landed like a slap. Margaret stared at him, disbelief hardening into anger. How dare you speak to me this way after everything I've done for you? Joseph held her gaze steadily. That's exactly why. Her voice dropped sharp and cold. I protected you. I shaped you. I built the life you now enjoy. And in the process, Joseph said quietly, you taught me how to look away when someone was hurting. Margaret's lips parted, then pressed together. You're emotional, she said. This is not the time for accusations. This is the only time, Joseph replied. Because Nia almost died. Margaret flinched slightly, though she quickly masked it. She was fragile. She was alone, Joseph corrected, and I allowed it. Silence stretched between them, thick and brittle. You will not keep me from my grandson, Margaret said, finally. Joseph inhaled slowly. You can see him, he said, but only after you understand this. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You will not diminish my wife. You will not question her worth. You will not control this family through fear or expectation. If you cannot accept that, then you will not be part of our lives. Margaret stared at him, stunned. You would choose her over me, she whispered. Joseph did not hesitate. Yes. The word did not carry anger. It carried clarity. Margaret's composure cracked. For a brief moment, something like grief crossed her face. Grief not for what she had lost, but for what she had never known how to give. You're making a mistake, she said, weakly. Joseph shook his head. I already made it. This is me correcting it. Margaret looked past him toward the closed door, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of the life now beyond her reach. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Joseph did not follow. Later that evening, when Nia woke, Joseph told her everything. He did not soften the truth. He did not excuse himself. He spoke quietly, honestly, sitting beside her bed with Ethan sleeping between them. She listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable. When he finished, he waited, bracing himself. You didn't choose late, Nia said finally. You chose when it mattered. Joseph swallowed. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. Nia looked down at their son, her hand resting protectively over him. Forgiveness is a process, she said softly. So is trust. Joseph nodded. I'll earn it. She looked back at him, then really looked at him. Just don't rush it like everything else. A faint smile touched his lips. I won't. That night, Joseph sent messages to his board and senior executives. He announced an indefinite step back from daily operations. Meetings would wait. Decisions would be delegated. His priority was here. The response was immediate confusion, concern, even criticism, but Joseph felt no urge to explain himself. For once, he was not managing perception. He was living truth. 2 days later, Sister Ruth Adebayo returned quietly to the hospital. Not as a savior, not as a symbol, but as a witness. Joseph found her in the chapel, seated in the back row, her head bowed. They're both well, he said softly, approaching. She looked up and smiled. I know. Joseph hesitated, then sat beside her. I told my mother she couldn't see them until she changed. Sister Ruth nodded. That was not easy. No, he admitted, but it was necessary. She studied him for a moment. Power often hides behind tradition, she said. You removed the hiding place. Joseph exhaled. I'm afraid of becoming rigid in a different way. Sister Ruth smiled gently. Then keep listening. He nodded. When she met Nia again, the moment was quiet and unceremonious. No speeches, no tears this time. Thank you, Nia said simply. Sister Ruth shook her head. Live well, she replied. That's thanks enough. She placed a small wooden cross on the bedside table, not as instruction, but as memory and left. As the days passed, Nia grew stronger. Ethan gained weight. Laughter returned in soft, tentative bursts. Joseph learned how to hold his son without fear, how to change diapers, how to sit in silence without trying to fix it. And in that quiet transformation, something remarkable happened. Justice arrived not with punishment or spectacle, but with boundaries, with truth spoken aloud, with love finally placed above pride. Nia Mwangi left the hospital on a quiet morning, wrapped in sunlight and cautious hope. There were no cameras waiting outside, no public statements. Joseph had insisted on that. The exit was discreet, almost ordinary, just a wheelchair rolling slowly toward the doors, a newborn sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, and a man walking beside them, alert to every breath she took. As the automatic doors opened, fresh air filled Nia's lungs. She paused for a moment, closing her eyes, letting the warmth settle into her bones. For weeks, her body had known only fear, pressure, and confinement. Now it was learning something new. Freedom. Joseph watched her carefully. "Are you okay?" he asked instinctively, ready to stop everything if she said no. She nodded. "I am," she said, for the first time in a long while. At home, the house felt unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because the rules inside it had. The silence no longer carried tension, it carried possibility. Joseph had removed more than half the staff temporarily. No visitors were allowed without Nia's consent. The rooms were rearranged softer, lighting fewer reminders of hierarchy, more signs of life. Flowers arrived from friends and colleagues, but Joseph kept only those Nia wanted. Everything else was sent away. Margaret Mwangi did not come. She sent a message instead, brief, carefully worded, filled with pride and restraint. Joseph read it once, then placed it aside. He did not respond immediately. Nia noticed. "You don't have to decide everything now," she said gently. "I know," Joseph replied. "For once, I'm not rushing." The days settled into a rhythm neither of them had known before. Feeding schedules, quiet conversations at dawn. Ethan's small cries breaking the stillness of the night, and the way Nia and Joseph learned together how to answer them. Joseph had never felt so unprepared, and never so committed. One afternoon, as Nia rested with Ethan sleeping against her chest, Joseph sat nearby watching them. He thought of all the years he had spent building structures, companies, networks, safeguards, believing stability was something external. Now he understood. Stability was presence. He reached for Nia's hand. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked at him calmly. "I'm listening. I'm stepping down from my executive role," Joseph said quietly. "Not forever, but for now." Nia studied his face. "Why?" "Because I don't want to rebuild my old life around this new truth," he said. "I want to build something different." She absorbed his words slowly. "What does that look like?" Joseph exhaled. "I don't fully know yet, but it looks like listening before deciding, protecting before providing, and never mistaking silence for peace again." Nia's eyes softened. "That's a good place to start." Later that week, Joseph invited Sister Ruth Adebayo to the house. She arrived without ceremony, her presence as unassuming as ever. When she held Ethan for the first time, her hands were steady, reverent. "He carries a quiet strength," she said softly. Nia smiled. "So did you." Sister Ruth returned the smile, then turned to Joseph. "Have you decided what you will do with what you've learned?" Joseph nodded. "I have." He told her about the changes he planned to make within his hospitals, his foundations, his leadership. Policies to address emotional well-being alongside physical care, programs to support women facing silent pressure in high-risk pregnancies, training for doctors and staff to recognize not just symptoms but stories. Medicine should not only treat bodies, Joseph said, it should protect dignity. Sister Ruth listened, then nodded once. then you have understood. When she left that evening, Nia felt a quiet certainty settle into her chest. The circle was complete. Weeks passed. Nia grew stronger each day. Ethan thrived. Joseph learned patience the hard way through sleepless nights, uncertainty, and the slow rebuilding of trust. One evening, Joseph finally responded to his mother. He invited Margaret Mwangi to visit on one condition, that she come not as authority, but as family. Margaret arrived subdued, her confidence tempered by distance and consequence. She stood at the threshold uncertain. Nia met her gaze steadily. "I am not here to fight," Nia said, "but I will not disappear." Margaret hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I see that now." It was not an apology, but it was a beginning. Joseph watched the exchange with quiet resolve. Whatever came next would be built on truth, not obligation. Months later, as the first rains of the season washed the city clean, Joseph stood on the balcony with Nia and Ethan. The air smelled of earth and renewal. "I used to think justice meant winning," Joseph said softly. "Now I think it means not repeating harm." Nia leaned into him. "Justice is choosing differently when you know better." Ethan stirred between them, his small hand curling instinctively around Joseph's finger. Joseph smiled. The billionaire who once believed money could solve anything now understood something far more valuable. That love must be defended, that silence must be challenged, and that healing begins the moment someone is finally heard. This story reminds us that the most dangerous wounds are not always visible. Nia's body did not begin to fail because medicine was weak, but because her voice had been quieted for too long. Her suffering grew in the spaces where love was assumed instead of practiced, where silence was mistaken for strength, and where power chose comfort over compassion. Healing did not begin when the best doctors arrived. It began when someone finally listened without judgment, without agenda, and without asking Nia to be anything other than human. Joseph's journey is a mirror many of us need to face. Good intentions are not the same as good actions. Providing materially does not excuse emotional absence. Protecting peace at the cost of justice is not love, it is avoidance. True growth begins when we are brave enough to confront our own failures, especially when those failures were wrapped in politeness, tradition, or authority. Joseph did not redeem himself with grand gestures, but with humility, boundaries, and the courage to change patterns he once defended. Sister Ruth's role teaches us another quiet truth. Kindness is never wasted. The compassion Nia showed years earlier returned to her, not as magic but as meaning. Life has a way of remembering how we treat the most vulnerable, and those moments often return when we need them most. What we give freely has a way of circling back, not always in the form we expect, but always with purpose. This story is not about miracles that defy science. It is about the power of dignity, safety, and being seen. It is about how emotional neglect can harm as deeply as physical injury, and how healing requires more than expertise. It requires humanity. In families, in relationships, and in society, silence should never be the price someone pays to belong. If this story touched you, take a moment to reflect. Have you truly listened to the people you love? Have you mistaken silence for peace or control for care? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. Your perspective may help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that speak about healing, justice, and real human change, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reaching those who need them most.